All right, I think we're live. Apologies for the delayed start. Just a few gremlins in the system. Welcome to it. Molo Sanbonani. Hello, how's it? Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. You're watching the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Tonight, we unpack the coalition talks that have been happening throughout the country. Goodness me, are things beginning to heat up on this cold winter cold snap that we are enduring in South Africa? Before I do any of that, where are my manners? Good evening to every single one of you, whether you're watching on X, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or on TikTok. I think we are on all of those streams. Welcome to it. Please do me a favor. Hit that like button. Yebo, smash that like button as I am frozen on screen. There we go, I'm back. Hit that like button, please, whether you're watching on any of those social media platforms. And of course, if it is on YouTube, then subscribe to the channel. Hit that subscribe button. Join the over 42,000 plus now who are on the show, subscribers to the show. And we do have a website, which is currently down. But again, it's all of those gremlins that I'm talking about, the Mogwai, that should give away my age there. But nonetheless, please make sure you find us on our website once it's up at bigdaddyliberty.com. Now, tonight, without further ado, let me bring in my guest tonight who will help us unpack the good, the bad, and the ugly of all the coalition talks that are happening at the moment from the Institute of Race Relations, and someone who, if you are a fan of the Daily Friend, you are watching and consuming his content, and that is Marius Roodt. There he is on screen. Marius, good evening.
Hello, Sihle. How are you?
Good to see you, my brother. Good to be back on solid ground, so to speak, having done the What South Africa Can Be tour over the last month ahead of these elections with the IRR. We'll get into some of that a bit later because it's instructive on tonight's topic. My last guest for tonight is Koketso Resane, one part of the trio over at the ManPatria Podcast. Koketso, Baba, good evening.
Yeah, evening to everyone. It's been a while, so hopefully everything is still in place. The chairs and tables are where I left them.
I was about to say, tables, chairs, and ladders is perhaps a good theme for tonight's chat, given that there is potential here for a lot of these coalition partners or parties, pardon me, as they're trying to find partners for there to be conflict. I'm going to get into that, and what I'm referring to there is perhaps the sort of weird antagonism between the ANC and the MK party. But before any of that, Marius, I'm just going to ask you to tilt your camera down. Just there you go, so that we're at the same level. And maybe as I'm doing that, let me put on screen, Marius, I'll begin with you. The election results, a interesting set of results for those who have been lambasting and saying, oh, the polling is wrong, the polling is absolute crap. Well, they are eating a very fat slice of humble pie tonight, are they not?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the polls overshot the ANC's final support a little bit. Most polls, even the most pessimistic polls for the ANC had them at about 42-43%. So, I mean, it's absolutely, I mean, it's such a collapse in support. It's incredible. I mean, the most ANC had ever lost between elections before this was 7 percentage points. In this election, they've lost 17 percentage points. So a lot of people were saying on social media, you know, it would never happen. I was also skeptical it wouldn't happen, but this sometimes happens in democracies. Sometimes the governing party, or not just governing party, parties can see massive collapses in support. And this happened to the ANC. But that all said, the ANC, it still is the biggest party in 7 provinces. It won majorities in 5 out of 9 provinces. It was the biggest single party in every municipality in the Free State, Limpopo, Northwest. In the Northern Cape, there was only one municipality wasn't the biggest, same as in the Eastern Cape. So, and Gauteng was the same. It was the biggest party in every municipality except for Midvaal. So, people must be a bit careful, I think, about writing the ANC off quite yet. A lot can happen. I think it's very, very vulnerable at the moment. But people, also a lot depends what happens on with MK over the next 5 years. If MK collapses into infighting, I could easily see the ANC getting back to high 40s in the next election. So there's a lot that could still happen, but I think the ANC is probably the most vulnerable it's been definitely in the post-apartheid era.
pardon me, excuse me. Let's speak to that, because on screen at the moment we have the sort of national overview, the national picture, if you will, which the IEC have also, of course, included now the seat allocation, if you can have a look in that sort of, or my right to your left, possibly as the viewer. But let's have a look at the top three parties there. Really, a big surprise here being two things, effectively. If you were listening to the chatter before the elections, whether on social media, on chat radio, whatever the case may be, we were being told, oh, the DA's had it. We were told, oh, because it has white leaders, by way of John Steenhuisen, who leads it at a national level, and the various leaders provincially, both in government and in the party, oh, it's white, we were told, that will decimate their numbers. And here we are, Marius, with the DA, John Steenhuisen himself, having baked a fat humble pie to his detractors. Do you think they're buoyed by this result? If anything, pretty much keeping their percentage, maybe increasing it a little bit, but definitely seeing more seats in Parliament. Are they happy with that kind of result?
Yeah, I don't think they'd be unhappy with this, but obviously just going up by 1 percentage point, they're still off their best ever result, which was 2014, when they got 22.2% of the vote, I think. But overall, I think they would be satisfied with this. They obviously got more support. They held on to the Western Cape, but I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but they went backwards in, I think, 5 provinces in terms of support. So, they lost support in KwaZulu-Natal. They lost very marginal levels of support in Gauteng and the Western Cape. So I think they'd be satisfied, but I don't think they're going to be jumping up and down. But that all said, there are only 2 parliamentary parties that saw that increased their support, and that was the DA and the IFP. So that's something, and the IFP did this in this context of this MK onslaught. So that's definitely something. As I was saying now, it all depends what happens with MK. I think if MK does collapse, the IFP could be a very big beneficiary of people who were voting for MK before. But overall, I would say the DA, I think, they'd be satisfied with this. But I don't think they could have maybe, at certain points in polling, with Gareth van Onssel's polling from the Social Research Foundation, which turned out to be pretty accurate. In the early parts of the campaign, like late April, middle of April, the DA was polling as high as 30% sometimes. So the DA needs to work out what's, there's obviously quite a lot of voters who are available to the DA, but towards the end of the election, they decide not to vote for the party. So I think that's something that's definitely going to have to look into. But overall, this wasn't a bad result for the party, and held on to Western Cape, which I think is quite important for it.
Koketso, I'm going to bring you in here because, again, this election was humbling to a lot of parties, chief of which, and before I get to that, actually, I want to pose the same question I posed to Umaris to you, which is, to me at least, the headline from this election should have been MK Party, fantastic results as a newcomer, ANC below the 50% mark, DA, marginal increase, but EFF sliding backwards. Your quick assessment on, let's call it, firstly, the MK Party as a newcomer, and the EFF in particular, because often on social media, you and I endure a lot of the abuse of EFF types, but they were very quiet over this election results announcement.
Yeah, firstly, I think EFF types don't really understand the identity they've crafted for themselves. And this is showing now when it comes to elections. I've always been of the belief that in the last national election, the EFF was actually lucky to breach that 10%. It sounded ridiculous for the past 5 years, but now it's actually come to fruition. But yeah, I think when we talk about MK, it came surely as a surprise to me. I didn't think they would take the number 3 spot in the National Assembly. I didn't think they would take the number 1 spot in KZN either. In terms of, just total number of votes, if I can put it like that. So it certainly came as a surprise to me. But with that said, they might have done very well as a party, especially as a newcomer. In fact, they've done exceptionally well. Let's not forget that the Umkhonto weSizwe party is walking into parliament with more seats than the EFF has ever managed to tally up in their 10-year existence. So that is beyond impressive, if we have to really be honest. But if you ask a lot of their support, in terms of, you're right, who who do you want to go to parliament? I'm talking about MK supporters. If you had to talk to the people who gave them the vote, and you had to ask those same people, who do you want to actually go to the National Assembly? Most of them can't give you more than 3, 4, 5 names. And that says a lot. To me, it says that, right, maybe let's call it flash campaigning was probably effective. Failing the effectiveness of flash campaigning, I would then say that people were basically, they voted emotionally, if I can put it like that. Emotionally, in that they feel the MK represents them and it's well within their right to exercise that constitutional right. But again, if you can't tell me who's going to parliament in your party or what your party actually represents, other than the usual hot topics of they represent Black people, that to me tells me that you're not actually politically literate and that you made an emotional decision when it came to you marking X on the ballot paper. I think that's what's happened with the MK party. I will be gladly proven wrong, but come the next election, we are likely to see the result of that. But they've done exceptionally well. And for me, the EFF has gone back to where they were always going to be going forward, which is a sub 10% party, probably irking around the 9.5%, which is exactly where they are.
Again, guys, before we move into the actual coalitions talk, I think it is important for us to unpack some of these points, because effectively what we're doing in these first 15 minutes or so of the show is talking about the actual individual potential coalition partners, right? And let's stick with the MK party for a moment, because Marius, and I'll throw this to both of you, but Marius, have the first bite of this question. People tend to forget that the MK party is a bit like the dog that chases the car, right? And finally actually then gets the car. But here's the problem. MK party does not have structures or any realistic structures. This party was only really formed around December last year in real terms and just hit the ground with Zuma as a figurehead. So Zuma actually is a bigger brand than the MK party brand I would put forward. I want to get your view on that. And number two, not only does it not have structures and it's hastily possibly putting those together, including answering the question, what will those structures look like? Are they simply going to copy the ANC, which they are effectively an offshoot of? But linked to that is they also do not have a internally consistent and internally, respected. That's not the word I was looking for, but effectively they don't have an internal leadership structure that everybody has voted for and therefore buy into. So that still has to happen, because ahead of this election, they kept telling us, oh no, they said, we're not going to focus on structures or leadership until after the election. Perhaps they themselves weren't thinking they'll do this well. Does this not bode red flags or sort of warning signs for a party that now has this amount of power, especially in KZN where they have 40% plus?
Yeah, I think that is a big risk for the party, but it does seem from what I've been reading and hearing is that a lot of ANC branches in KwaZulu-Natal just moved over to MK wholesale. So I don't know if that's going to give them a kind of framework to work on. But I do think this is literally just at the moment a Zuma party. I think a lot of people didn't necessarily vote for the MK just because of Zuma, but because it's this kind of Zulu nationalist grievance kind of vote. But if you look at their policies, I mean, it's really insane stuff. It's, kind of Pol Pot's year one Khmer Rouge 1970 stuff. And I'm sure a lot of people who watching saw the interview that his daughter Duduzile Zuma gave on one of the news channels, where somebody, the reporter said to them, what are your economic plans? And he said, no, we're going to do what we did under Jacob Zuma. And the woman said, can you please explain this to me? And he said, no, we're going to reduce the repo rate on that. I mean, that's where they really haven't thought through much about anything. And yeah, I mean, running a party in South Africa is difficult, but obviously they've done something here, but also they've got a big caucus. There's 60 people that are going to parliament. So, but you don't know how many of them are actually going to be decent parliamentarians and how many of these people are just going to be drawing salaries. And just on a final point, Jabulani Khumalo, who is the guy who has now been fighting with Jacob Zuma about who actually founded the party and who's the leader, he's been kicked out the party, apparently. There were these scenes of people chasing him in Johannesburg when they went to court. He is still he's still officially number one on the MK parliamentary list, still officially. That went out today. So it's actually, there's obviously going to be a lot of infighting in this party. And also, let's not forget, Jacob Zuma is an Olga. I don't know how much He still got in how much energy he still got left. But like somebody said in the comments, never underestimate Jacob Zuma. I think that's very good advice. And people have been underestimating him since the 1990s. And look where he is now.
Absolutely. I always say Jacob Zuma is the Wile E. Coyote, if you will, of SA politics, where he devises all sorts of plans. Some of them fail spectacularly, but a lot of them actually do work. Koketso, I want to throw this question to you because really I want to move us to the second part of our conversation tonight. You know, we've spoken a lot about the MK, and I want you to give us your view on that. Marius sort of threw it out there, this notion that the MK has relied a lot really on two things. I sort of raised the spectre that is Jacob Zuma, the cunning politician, the ever charismatic character who, if you were voting in KZN as I was, and you were listening to people speak and interviewing people as I was, please make sure you check out that interview on my channel. You would have heard people basically say, oh, we're voting for Jacob Zuma, they'll say, because, you know, when Jacob Zuma was in power, there were things he didn't do because he didn't have enough time with the ANC recalling him. This is what people were believing was effectively the basis of why Jacob Zuma was recalled. And it's on that basis, they argue, that Jacob Zuma must, quote unquote, finish his term in government. That's the first thing that I want you to quickly chew on, the sheer ignorance, really, that political illiteracy you were talking about. And lastly, it's that Zulu nationalism. It's this idea that, well, you know, it really is time for KZN to do things a certain way, if you will. I'm not 100% sold on the Zulu nationalism argument because there is a lot of antagonism between the Zulu king as the cultural figurehead of Zulus and the actual MK party, with Jacob Zuma seen as a bit of a risk to provincial stability, but it is a view that is preferred quite a lot. Your views, Koketso?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll touch on the first point, and that people believing that Mpiyakhe didn't have enough time to do certain things. So what they're basically saying is in his remaining 200 days or so, he was supposed to implement wholesale changes which would have impacted or, you know, improved the lives of Black people. Yeah, that is quite a naive view. He was still president of a party. Even within the party structures, he still had to appease those inside of the party. And those inside of the party, at least not just the top six, I'm talking about the NEC, and I forget what's the other bigger body than the NEC inside of the ANC. Yeah, the one with
the National Working Committee.
There we go, the NWC. He would still have had to appease even the NWC, which then filters down to the branch level as well. So Zuma, as the leader of not just the country, but the ANC, would have had to deal with all of these variables. And inside the party, there are still elements of, you know, not necessarily people who agree with his leadership, with what he does, and with a lot of what he's saying he wanted to do now. What I'm basically saying is he would have ran into many brick walls. He knows he would have ran into the brick walls. He was not going to do it in 200 days. But this is feeding into the exact narrative we have now, where Zuma has almost positioned himself as saying, right, treat me like a king, give me the power, vote for my guys, and we will bulldoze our way through the constitution and finally implement something which we as quote unquote Black people have always wanted since the dawn of democracy. It's a very tyrannical view, authoritarian view, bordering on totalitarianism and skirting the lines of fascism as well. And people are saying that this is what they want. So it does scream to an element of political illiteracy, if I can put it like that again. But at the same time, this is coming from people who don't realize that there is a parliament and these things have to go through the National Assembly. And until you have that 2/3 majority, you actually won't be able to make the kind of wholesale changes that Zuma is promising the masses. This is why I believe he was starting to introduce elements of saying that, right, the elections were not necessarily free and fair. But to speak into his delusions of grandeur, I mean, no one has actually said this since last week, not still this week, Sunday, I guess, but no one has actually said that we got dangerously close to a scenario where the Independent Electoral Commission was unable to actually announce the election results. I don't think people realize that. I think what Zuma wanted was to make the grand entrance, fashionably late, of course, and then go in there with his people and disrupt proceedings under the banner of the will of the people, is that we must recount the votes. I think that was the plan for the MK. That plan didn't materialize because their fashionably late plan actually backfired on them. And in the end, the INC announced the results. We got too close to that scenario, actually, and the headlines would have been the world over that Zuma has prevented the elections from actually concluding. No one is talking about that, but I believe that's the plan that Zuma had, and that's what he was alluding to when he said, do not provoke people. He would have masterminded the plan and then come out and said the will of the people was to do a recount because of the various irregularities. And again, this speaks of a tyrant. We got dangerously close to that. Luckily, we didn't. And because we didn't, the MK party is now caught with their pants down, not necessarily knowing what exactly do they have to do next. They didn't have a plan B and C, and this is why you still find the parliamentary list hasn't been updated yet. No one can tell you who's actually running administration in that party. They didn't plan that far. And we're starting to see evidence of that as well. So, but last point here is I just want to give a shout out now to the IFP. Again, for not just growing, but they grew their representation in the National Assembly in the absence of Ushenge. Now, I heard that he was used in election posters in some areas, but let's actually give the props where it's due. They managed to grow without Mangosuthu Buthelezi. I think that's quite admirable. And maybe them and the DA, the supporters, have maybe displayed an element of consistency that just doesn't exist in other political parties, at least those who were on the ballot. That shows me that, right, even though the election day didn't go smoothly, the supporters from those two parties have been fairly consistent, especially given the turnout as well. That has to be commended, and that's admirable.
Absolutely. With that being said, let me just quickly do some housekeeping. Welcome to it. My name is Sihle Ngobeso. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. We come to you Wednesdays ordinarily at 7:30, but we opted to delay to Thursday just to give these coalition talks time to fruit, so we can have a chat about them. Speaking about having a chat, I'm in conversation with Marius Roodt, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations, and you'll find his writing and content on the Daily Friend. That's dailyfriend.co.za. And of course, Koketso Resane, 1/3 of the hosts at the ManPatria Podcast. That's with Udumo Denga. Welcome to it, and please, guys, hit that like button as you're watching tonight's show, and of course share the content. I'm going to move us into the last bit of our conversation, the main bit, if you will, which is actually the coalitions. Now, with that being said, guys, I'm seeing your comments. Please keep them coming thick into the whether you're watching on any of the social media streams. If there is a question, dear viewer, we will pop it on screen and I'll throw it to our panel. We're in the last, let's call it 15 minutes of the show. I did ask my guests beforehand if things start cooking with grease to add extra 15 minutes to the show. Guys, I want to throw the actual coalition talks now. The results are out. They're out of the way, despite the attempts by the MK party to sow distrust and discord with the IEC to effectively create a chaotic environment, roping in the rats and mice type small political parties, many of whom didn't make it in, looking to create that sense of doubt. That failed, as Koketso rightly pointed out, flat on their face, and they now have to form a government. Let's be frank here, guys. Any government that has to be formed will have the ANC, who has the majority of the votes, or that is most of the minority votes, at the center of that conversation. So that any coalition agreement then has to begin at that point. So what are the options, Marius, that the ANC effectively has before it? There are three broad options here. There's obviously the sort of flat-out coalition with one or two political parties, usually touted as either the MK-EFF or EFF arrangement, the sort of ultra-left arrangement, just to give it one way to describe it. Or the other arrangement, of course, is sort of DA-ANC or DA-ANC-IFP arrangement. That's the sort of two broad sides. But there's also a sort of middle ground, in a sense, which is this notion called a confidence supply. Can you just quickly talk to us as to what that means? What is a confidence supply arrangement? And then opine on these two directions, if you will, that are pulling the ANC either one way to the left or to the right, effectively.
So a confidence and supply agreement is when political party goes into coalition with another partner and doesn't necessarily go into formal coalition. They'll just agree to support the government on certain issues, such as electing a president or a speaker or budgets and that kind of thing. So that's been one of the things that the DA has been that speculations that the DA could do that, where they'd be the confidence and supply partner for the ANC and wouldn't be in a formal coalition, but we'll just support the ANC on things such as budgets, helping elect the president and help block no confidence motions. So that's something that's quite common abroad. Canada is a place that often has these kinds of arrangements, and it's not a bad option, but I don't know how much, if the DA and ANC decide to do this, how much of the really bad policies of the ANC, the DA would be able to block. Obviously, the markets and probably a lot of the country would like a DA-ANC coalition. That would probably be pretty decent for the country, I think. There's obviously the option of a DA-EFF coalition, which I think is quite scary for a lot of us. But I think the ANC would probably favor a kind of government of national unity. And then it can also, if it says to the DA and EFF and smaller parties, say, look, guys, let's all try work together. And then they put the ball in the court of the EFF or the DA. And if they decide, oh, look, we're not going to work together, then they can say, look, well, we tried. You guys are the stumbling blocks here. So, but it all depends. I mean, what President Ramaphosa says now. But that all said, it's I have to give kudos to the ANC for accepting the loss in the way they did, and that we are in a place where we can have these conversations. In a lot of other countries, I mean, in Zimbabwe, if ZANU-PF came in at 40%, they would just send their goons out to beat up people until they decided, no, actually, ZANU-PF got 70%, or whatever the case is. So I have to give kudos to the ANC, and it says a lot about our democracy, but you've got to ask the question, if we have an ANC-MK-EFF coalition until 2029, will we ever have another free and fair election? And I think that's an important question.
Yeah, I think that is a very important question. And I am aware that the president right now, also Ramaphosa, is speaking. I have no idea what that's about. We'll probably keep an eye on it just by keeping an eye on Twitter. But Koketso, I must throw this question to you, really. And Marius said it, but it needs a little bit of attention from you. There's this notion that we often hear that a DA-ANC potential coalition option is for the markets, or the markets would want that. But this, and Marius, I'm not picking on you here, it's just something that's often said and it needs to be sort of dispelled. Markets are people. People are markets. And there is an expectation by South African voters, the same voters, by the way, who have a rather bad perception at the moment of coalitions. If they look at how coalitions are played out at local government elections, those same voters will be saying, hey, if you are going to do a coalition, we want a stable one. And that's perhaps why the DA-ANC coalition is seen as more stable. Koketso, or am I wrong here? Should the ANC be looking at an ultra-left coalition because it would offer them a 2/3 majority? That would be ANC-MK and EFF party, and that would be what Black people want, as we often hear.
Yeah, it's quite a loaded question, and I see there's even the comment there from Temba that says, "What's wrong with the EFF? They are democratic." Yeah, it's quite a loaded question. Look, I think in terms of the ANC plus DA option, the reason it's seen as the safest option is there is really a, let's call it a capable brains trust of people who are not new to the business of, let's call it, governance. DA with provincial experience in the Western Cape, DA with experienced politicians in their benches as well. ANC obviously haven't been in power for 30 years now already. So Yeah, in terms of stability, this is why the market sees them as the safe option. They are also the only two parties who, for lack of a better term, aren't leading coalition talks with this is our non-negotiables. The DA hasn't come out and says, do we have non-negotiables? The ANC's only non-negotiable is you will not tell us to recall our president. Which I think is fair, and I'd expect any party to do that. So I'm not going to hold it against the African National Congress. Everyone else who's got, a sizable amount of the electorate support is coming out with these non-negotiables, starting from MK through to the EFF. That's where the problem is. You cannot, in this sensitive, delicate situation, start leading with a list of non-negotiables. It basically means that you will push for what you want over what is best for the country. It basically tells the rest of the world that you are not interested in collecting broader opinion or expertise in terms of governance. You're telling the rest of the world that this is what we want, and if we don't get what we want, then to hell with everyone else. Except your voters, of course. That's basically what they're saying. And that doesn't speak of political maturity. That doesn't speak of good governance in general. I mean, even in business, you can be a CEO, but at the end of the day, you don't actually call the shots, right? If the business is big enough, the board could still come back and overrule you on certain things. They can even get rid of you. EFF hasn't even demonstrated that they can change leadership. Instead, we've seen quite the opposite. Speak out against Julius or fail to deliver a bus with X amount of people to the national rally, and you find yourself at the bottom of the parliamentary list. So EFF has a leader who rules by decree. He's now making demands in terms of what it takes to bring him on board. That doesn't speak of confidence. But inside the ANC and the DA, that's where you find, let's call it a measured approach, a more mature approach, a more let's come together and sit down approach compared to everyone else.
I'm going to speak with you, Koketso, for a moment. I'll come to you in a moment, Marius, because we're in the last 5 minutes or so, last 10 minutes, pardon me, of the show. Oh, I nearly skimmed on my own time. I want us to dispel something here, Koketso, that's often said online, and it's a very condescending and racist view. There is this idea by black leftists, I often call them blavity blacks, on social media. These are black individuals who trade, or these are black leftists, whether they're socialist or communist or statist, who trade on being black and then argue that their being black makes them the voice of so-called blackness, right? They own black people, effectively. They're our new plantation masters in a sense. But this narrative from these individuals basically says, oh no, they'll say, no one will cater to black wants or black aspirations other than black leftists. And that's why they argue, that's principally their argument for an ANC-EFF and MK arrangement, because not only does it give them unfettered powers by way of a 2/3 majority, I think they'll need a little bit extra to have the 2/3 majority, but nonetheless, they'll argue that, not only does that give them the 2/3 majority, but now they can change the constitution and effectively give Parliament, in other words, them as that coalition majority, the power to do as they will. And black people want this, of course, because, as I made the argument earlier, black leftists believe they own black people. I'm giving you a solid minute to disavow this view, or disprove rather, or demolish is the word I'm looking for, this view, Koketso.
Yeah, and no, they don't. Black people are not a single homogeneous group where beliefs are shared, pass one, pass all, one set of beliefs that spread across everyone with certain pigmentation. Everyone has individual agency. Everyone decides what's best for them. Everyone decides what career they go into. Everyone decides what they prioritize. And everyone, at the end of the day, decides who they vote for. So this idea that black people are this big collective with a shared vision is actually false. And we see that time and time again, not just at school, not just in the workplace, but we are also seeing it in elections. So it's simply false. And anyone who says that really, yeah, I don't even know what to say. Maybe they must just look inside of their own family. They don't have to take my word for it. Look inside your own family and ask those who are related to you if they agree with everything you say. That should tell you that you are not one homogeneous group, even if you share even a surname, let alone skin tone.
Sorry, absolutely. I was just saying, and Marius, I want to throw it to you because there's another side to this. Because if you've been paying attention on social media, in fact, Gareth van Onsling in a recent tweet pointed this out, that there's this massive effort right now, on an almost Bell Pottinger level of black influencers, black leftist influencers, to try and sanitize parties like the EFF as if they aren't radical, as if they haven't been saying things which are racist and anti-South African in a sense. And the same, of course, can be said about the MK party with some of its more ludicrous policy ideas, limited as they may be. There's this attempt, almost a Bell Pottinger type attempt, to drive this narrative that anything outside of those three parties, ANC, MK, and EFF, is simply not in the interests of black people. But here's my thing: who gives a flying fudge about the interests of so-called black people when it should be the interest of South Africans? Is that a distinction that we're just not making anymore in our politics, especially as these coalition talks go forward?
I think there are a lot of people who do still talk about South Africans rather than, I think you're right. There is just this kind of almost a Bell Pottinger-esque move to discredit a possible ANC-DA coalition. I know there were some ANC members protesting against the possible ANC-DA link-up earlier today at the Birchwood Hotel where NEC meeting was, but from the pictures I saw, looked like there were maybe 10 people or maybe 20 people tops at that meeting. So, but one thing that really gets me about also people who are opposing an ANC-DA link-up, I understand if people say they don't want to, it's not going to work because the ANC and DA are too far apart in terms of policy or whatever the case might be. But when people talk about the DA being the enemy, that really, I think we need to move away from this kind of language. I could understand people calling the old National Party the enemy because it was the enemy of black people and actually all South Africans actually. But the DA, it's not the enemy of the ANC, it's the opponents of the ANC. So same as political parties in a democracy, they're not your enemies, they are opponents. And I don't like this language where they say the DA is the enemy. They're not, they are the opponent. And also there's nobody in the DA who was ever no senior person who was ever in a proper leadership position in the National Party. People like Helen Zille and Tony Leon, they were opposed to apartheid in the 1980s and so on. So we need to move past this kind of rhetoric. Nobody's saying you must forget about apartheid or the terrible things that happened in the past, but we can't carry on calling other South Africans the enemy just because of their skin color, and that is going to hold South Africa back.
Absolutely, fellas. We effectively are running out of time. Let me just give both of you that final question on the issue of the coalitions, and maybe speak to me from your personal perspective, personal preference, maybe, as to what you're looking for. But there's two loaded questions here. The first is, talk to me about the vision of each direction. The vision of a ANC-DA-IFP type arrangement. I'll call it broadly the center right. It's not really, I don't know how to sort of describe this, but let's call it the DA option. What does that side look like? And of course, talk to us from a policy perspective as to what the other side of the equation looks like, which is the ANC-EFF-MK and even PA has been touted as an option as being part of that. Talking about those two options, and of course, which you would maybe likely prefer, or maybe even just what arrangement generally you would like to prefer. Marius, I'll begin with you.
I think a DA-ANC arrangement would probably be the best, but I don't know if that would be good for the DA, actually. Often in coalitions, the junior partner suffers. We saw it happen in the UK when the Lib Dems went to the Tories. In 2010, Lib Dems and the Tories went to coalition. The Lib Dems had about 57 seats. In the next election in 2015, they didn't really manage to get any policy concessions from the Tories, and they fell down to about 8 seats. They still haven't really recovered. Still only about 9 or 10 seats. And I think that's a very big risk for the DA because I don't know if they'll be able to really get any reforms going and manage to block the bad kind of policies of the ANC, and they could get punished heavily in the next election. Obviously, an ANC-EFF-MK link up is by far the worst, I think. But that said, I mean, I don't know if this is just wishful thinking, but often in other parts of the world, when a party that's quite far on the left gets into government, they often moderate their stance. The ANC is actually an example of that too. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, they were still pushing for things like nationalization and all that kind of stuff. And they soon moderated their views when they saw how the real world works. And we saw how well South Africa worked in the 1990s and the early 2000s when the ANC had fairly orthodox economic policies and was, not as hostile to the free market as it is today. But that said, I mean, I don't think an ANC-EFF-MK coalition would lead to anything good. And probably the best outcome is maybe a government of national unity with as many partners as possible, including the DA and the EFF. But probably the second best option is some kind of confidence in supply between the ANC and DA, possibly. But it's all quite, may live in interesting times as the Chinese coast goes.
Absolutely. Okay, so maybe as that final question, I'm going to throw it to you. Which way is beneficial for South Africans? Do we sort of lean on the ANC-IFP-DA type spectrum in whatever arrangement, whether it's a full-on coalition where they work together in one government, or it's a confidence supply where ANC is the executive, the DA is given, sort of the legislature with the IFP, or the other side of the conundrum, ANC, MK, EFF, which is beneficial for the country? Talk to me about the policy implications for each direction, and maybe which would you prefer?
So I'll start with my preference. This dates back to before the election. I would have personally preferred the moonshot. Yeah, maybe it was doomed to fail from the beginning, but I would have preferred the moonshot. I don't believe people who have grown accustomed to sitting on the benches and doing absolutely nothing, if not looting the state and pilfering the coffers, would have suddenly decided, you know what, let's actually stop being thieves and do honest work. So I would have preferred the moonshot. And to those that are wondering, moonshot would have meant everyone except for the ANC and potentially the EFF. No one at the time knew just how big the MK would become. And that moonshot would have taken place, assuming that some of the new entrants, Patriotic Alliance, Action for South Africa, the likes of your Bossa, would have gained much higher support numbers than they did. That unfortunately didn't happen. So my wish is out the window. In terms of what would work best, unfortunately, I don't like it, but an ANC-DA coalition would work best for the country. Picture a scenario where, right, you still have the ANC with the majority. That will keep the DA in check, but you also have the DA with quite a lot of pull keeping the ANC in check. A scenario where we have DA ministers in the executive. In terms of which portfolios, we shall see if it does come to pass. But yeah, imagine that scenario. I mean, shadow ministers in the Democratic Alliance have proven to be, very capable in a shadow ministry capacity. So why not give them a shot at the whole thing? So that's the only way a coalition comes into play. I don't know what the cabinet will look like, but picture that scenario where the entire executive isn't made up of 99% ANC plus 1% with Patricia de Lille. That, I think, is the best for the country. Maybe this is how we slowly start turning things around. And that's what I believe builds the sentiment of this is what the markets would prefer. Because these two organizations have demonstrated that they are democratic in some way or another. That's a one-up on every other party in existence. One-up even on the IFP, who for a long time just had one figurehead. And the EFF is heading in that direction. The opposite of that is everyone except for the DA coming up with the ANC, means we are going to see some radical proposals put in Parliament, the likes of the Patriotic Alliance, the EFF, the MK. All of them will be throwing spaghetti at the wall in terms of what they want, and something will stick. And whatever sticks is going to make life objectively worse for the country, not just looking at myself as Koketso or people of my skin color or racial background or ethnicity or tribe or anything like that. But yeah, these other parties will be throwing a lot of things at the wall. Something will stick, and whatever sticks will still, at the end of the day, make the wall dirty.
Guys, we are out of time. I do want to just take a minute to maybe give my quick view on this. Just first of all, that open question I made as to which way to go. Of course, there should be no entertaining of an ANC-EFF-MK type arrangement. I don't care how black leftists feel about that, whether they'll be angry at me and they'll call me names in the comments. I do not care. I despise the policy ideas of statism, socialism, and communism. And as I always say, socialism is cancer, and never trust a commie. So that's just one thing I have to quickly get out the way. But now that we don't got that out the way, I would love to see I actually wouldn't love to see a coalition per se, as in one government of an ANC, IFP, and DA, for the simple reason that Marius brought up. If the ANC is a poison chalice, going into a coalition with them, with their weak governance structures, with their weak and corrupt leaders, even if you brought a DA level of efficiency, an IFP level of organization, simply, if that thing flops, your voters will punish you. And the nature of our politics now, if you look at this election, is that it's done what has always been said would happen, which is these broad churches that big parties used to call themselves are fragmenting. Naturally, people are moving away and they're forming into what we used to call factions, but really into the interest groups that deserve their own political party. The ANC for a long time was a party held together almost in a very Frankensteinish stitching way of various interest groupings and various lobbies and various factions. The realignment of South African politics was always going to see the breaking of these various big parties into interest groups, to which the DA, if it simply kept its centrist message, was always going to be one of the more bigger blocks of that, made up pretty much of mostly middle-class black, white, Indian, and colored individuals, and aspirant middle-class black, white, and Indian individuals. So the DA is in a very strong position going forward, given this new realignment of politics. So with that being said, I wouldn't want it to then tarnish that brand or alienate that base by going into a coalition with people who literally hate the middle class. The ANC have proven over the last 30 years that they have a disrespect and a disdain for the middle class and aspirant middle class by taxing us to death, by putting in place policies that kill our ability to choose, the freedom to choose things that we want, whether it's private healthcare, private education, private security, the very same three things that the ANC as a government fails to provide. But now they're going after those things. And not only do they tax that same interest or that grouping of middle-class individuals heavily, but that same ANC is now going after the savings of those people by proposing policies like prescribed assets, expropriating land without compensation. It's literally going after the savings of those people. So I would rather the ANC dies that natural death by being in a government on its own, even as a minority party, with then the confidence being supplied by the DA and the IFP in Parliament as the heads of the legislature. In short, that's the arrangement I'd love to see, where the ANC is left to self-mutilate as a government for the last 5 years, and minority government of 40%. So they have the executive. The legislature or parliaments are governed by or controlled by the DA-IFP type arrangement. They have speaker and the various chairpersons holding that executive to greater account. And of course, the judiciary continues to be strengthened and the like. That would be my personal preference. Let me know what you think. Guys, thank you very much to my panel. Guys, I'm going to give you final word as to how people can get in touch with you on social media and anything that you may be writing or content that you may be producing. Final word, Marius, hit it.
Yeah, people can find my writing on dailyfriend.co.za. And if they want to follow me or the Daily Friend on Twitter, it's at dailyfriendsa or at Marius C. Roodt.
Koketso, Poti?
Well, best place to find me is that app called X, formerly known as Twitter. Yeah, I'm struggling to find time to do other things right now, including writing, etc., etc. So yeah, but if you do want me on your podcast, just send me a message. Yeah, and my final word again, guys, this is really the consequence of having a democracy. It means you won't get your way. Other people have different ideas and are going to express them differently. So stop insulting people for not doing what you would do. This is just the consequence of democracy, and let's all bask in the glory that liberty is, that democracy gives in terms of liberty at the very least. Yeah.
Absolutely. That is Koketso Resane from the ManPatria Podcast, and someone who you can catch online. And of course, Marius Roodt from the Institute of Race Relations and the Daily Friend. Guys, thank you for watching the show. I saw the comments coming in thick and fast. Very strong numbers tonight. It's good to be back, over 1,000 plus, at least as my software is pointing out, watching tonight. Guys, do me a favor. As you're heading out, please hit that like button, smash that like button tonight. And with that being said, subscribe to the channel, please. It really does help grow our numbers. And hey, let me know what you think. I know a lot of you don't like some of my views, especially the black leftists who I attack or damn, but I do listen to you guys, and that's the whole point of the show. I may not agree with you, and I might, yeah, but I do listen to you guys. But a reminder, please hit that like button on your way out. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube in particular, subscribe to the channel. Please, once the website is up, find us at BigDaddyLiberty.com. There, more information on where this channel is going and the movement we're building going forward will be on the website. Some exciting stuff. If you liked the content we did over the last month, the What South Africa Can Be content, look out for more content like that as I travel around the country advocating for liberty and free market ideas. With that being said, enough jibber jabber from me. I remind you, as I like to say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.